So you've got your fancy mechanical keyboard. It's got nice keycaps on it, and you've been using it for a year. Now, it looks kind of gross, and you have to clean it. But you don't know how. Well, today, I'm going to show you how to clean a mechanical keyboard. And, yeah, you really don't need much for this. Hello and welcome. My name is Wolfie. You're watching GreaterThanPie, and today I'm going to show you how to clean a mechanical keyboard. Now, why a mechanical keyboard and not a membrane keyboard? Well, for the most part, those don't have keys that come off, or at least don't come off easily. For those keyboards, you're going to really just be able to do a surface level cleaning, where a mechanical keyboard, you can take all these keys off and get deep in there. Now, most of the time, you could use something like this. This is a hand duster. And you can use it to just kind of blow away the stuff on the top of the keyboard. But after about a year or so of use, you've built up grime, you've built up debris, and honestly, it's gonna need a deeper clean than that. Fortunately, there's really only a couple tools that you could possibly need to make this work. This right here is a keycap and switch remover. Now, this keyboard right here actually has a hotspot PCB, which means I can actually pull out the switches, which we're not gonna have to do because realistically, all of the dirt and grime should just be on these first few layers. Now, looking at this keyboard, you can see that the keycaps themselves don't look great either. So we've got a little bit of water and paper towels because once you have the keycaps removed, you can actually wash them with water or any other cleaning solution that you would like. Just don't use a harsh chemical and don't use an acid, because if you use an acid, you might actually eat into the plastic. You don't want to etch it on accident. So be gentle with it and you should do fine. The other tool we got today is a microfiber cloth, which we're going to use to clean the actual plate of this. But you can use everything from a toothbrush to a makeup brush that has never been used. In fact, actually, I would prefer to be using a toothbrush because it would go a lot faster. Same thing goes for the keycaps. Now this keyboard right here is actually my office keyboard. I, yes, built a custom keyboard for my office. And while it may seem a little weird, it is actually kind of nice to have a good linear mechanical keyboard that I hand lubed and built myself, because typing is a key part of my job. But it's been sitting in the office, which is connected to a warehouse, which means that unfortunately it's been sitting in a warehouse. So there is a lot of dust, some hair, probably a bit of food because they feed us every month. So yeah, let's open this up and see how bad it is underneath there. It's really hard to really get a good idea because this is a condensed layout keyboard. For switches on this board, I've got Duroc Lavenders. I think they're just called Duroc Purples, but they look lavender, and I've heard them called lavenders before just because Duroc does not have a great name. The switches themselves have been great over the last year. The biggest issue is definitely I chose a white and purple keycap set, which looks great, but it's become more of a gray and purple over the years. And man, this plate has definitely seen better days. It is looking gross under here. Now what we could do is, if things were starting to feel a little bit less smooth, we could come in and re-lube these switches. We would need to use this end of the keycap puller to disengage the latches on the switches, which is on the left and on the right. They pop right off pretty easily. And then we could pop it into a keycap opener like this one, which for this is the kale style keycap. Nope, this is the cherry style. So you just kind of put that into the keycap push opener, pops it open, gives us access to the spring, to the slides and everything, so that we could re-lube if we wanted to. Hotspot PCBs are great because you can change everything about the board. Of course, not everybody has the time to build a custom keyboard. And while this one right here actually was a budget board, I can imagine finding something off the shelf that works just as well would be preferable to most people. I do think that the funniest thing about this board is the fact that it is a custom mechanical keyboard that I use for work. And I didn't go with silent switches. I actually straight up went with linears because I found that linears have a better typing experience, and most people won't care about the sound of a linear switch but they would definitely care if you were using a clicky. Temporarily, I've got one of my tacticals sitting at my desk, and it has been fun to try to type office emails with a tactical keyboard, which is better, I think, for gaming than it is for typing. Really is eye-opening. People who make custom keyboards like this have a preference, but rarely do they really like get to test the other use cases. And so being able to test a use case that isn't typical of me, because my typical use case is gaming, of course, it makes it very interesting to really see the difference, the strengths and weaknesses of each type of switch. All right, we are in, and God, is that one gross looking keyboard. I'm sure you can see it in the overhead. It is, oh boy. It's like a lot of hair. There's like crumbs in there. This is my bad entirely. You know, I'm not exactly the best person when it comes to my work environment. So I may actually have to get a brush because I don't think this is gonna cut it. Maybe just a straight up feather duster. Typically, I would not recommend doing what I'm about to do, but I can't seem to find a brush. So this is a broom head, and we're just gonna, that is working really well, actually. You know, it may not have been the best idea at first, but this works really well. Hand broom. Hand broom would work. Well, I guess it is technically a brush. It actually worked really well. Now there is still some gunk in between here. So what I'm gonna do is, that's probably like stuck on gunk. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna low amounts of moisture. Preferably you would wanna do this with distilled water. Let's see if I can get in there. Can't really get in there without removing the switches. So we're gonna have to remove all the switches to really clean the plate. Fun, all right. This is a particularly bad case, by the way. Worst case scenario kind of situation. Now, if you can't take your keyboard down to this level, you're gonna have to just rely on the brushing method. Maybe be very careful with the cleaning that you do on the plate. Granted, most boards can be taken apart to the point that you can remove the plate, which we could do here as well if we wanted to. But the way that this board is constructed, once we get these switches out, the plate's gonna be pretty easy to clean. Okay, we got this down to its bare plate and PCB along with case. I'm just gonna take a little rag. We're gonna get it wet and we're gonna wring out the excess. We don't really want this dripping. Just wanna wipe away the gunk. Rubbing alcohol would be appropriate to use here. Because we're working with an elevated plate, I'm not as worried. And we're using distilled water. Fun fact, distilled water carries no electrical current. So if it gets on the PCB, it's not the end of the world. Which is also why distilled water has an expiration date, because eventually it will pick up enough of the stuff around it and it will become conductive again. All right, that is looking much better. Now, despite this being distilled water, I don't really want to take any risk. So we're gonna let this sit over here to dry out completely while we wash our keycaps with more distilled water. It's gonna create a nice space for them to sit in. It sounds like ice in an ice cube, or in a, what's it called? In a drink. That's it. This water is gonna go very quickly from distilled to not distilled. They are small and this job is tedious. Okay, all right, now that they're all clean, I'm gonna let everything dry overnight to ensure that all of the moisture is completely absorbed before we put this thing back together. All right, it's the next day and everything is dry. Everything is clean and we are ready to reassemble this board. Now, since we've pretty much taken this down to its bare bones, I might as well talk about what this board is and why it's so cool for an office keyboard. So, I did mention that we have Duroc lavenders for our switches. Now, these have been lubed with 205 grade 0, and they are linears, so they're pretty nice. And they actually have a really high spring tension on them, which is why it's actually really fun to type on these. Our case is actually a Skylong case. This is a budget case I got off of AliExpress. PCB, north-facing LEDs, surprisingly 5-pin layout, and a plastic body. Now, it came with no foam, a steel plate, and is pretty basic, but at the same time, with a tape mod installed, it's pretty good. We also tape modded our stabilizers as well. Our keycap set is Acco Slate, I think it is. I'll have to double check that, but it's a keycap set that comes in both purple and blue, I think it is. The purple is a literal color swap that you can do with the keycap set for one price, which is actually really cool. So let's just build this thing. So all we need to do is go one switch at a time. There's so many like scratches on this plate from the installations that make it look like there's like hairs all over the place. So I keep like rubbing it away like, oh man, I left some hairs here. And it turns out it was just a scratch. Okay, now I'm gonna take this over to my computer and we're gonna run it through the QMK keyboard tester to make sure all the switches work and that we don't need to make any adjustments. We're done testing it. It's a good thing we did test it because there were a couple of keys that did have some bent pins. Now, if you ever have a bent pin, it's actually really easy to fix. I just use a knife and I just unbend the pin a little bit. It doesn't take very long to do and you don't really have to worry as much about damaging them because they're actually pretty thick. Okay, so now comes the fun part, keycaps. With a weird layout like this, I like to do the keys that I know beforehand because it just becomes easier to fill out everything. You know, if you've got your backspace key, your enter key in, your escape key, space bar, and then you can just kind of like remember where everything else goes. So in a shift, I believe it's enter, and then it goes plus up here. Does that look right, or do I have on flip? I mean, this is a mostly standard layout anyway, but sometimes they get a little weird. I know, little shift goes down. And it's now complete. Very pretty colorway, nice and clean, and just listen to this sound. As you can hear, this is not a bad board to listen to, which means it's not a bad board to use in an office. In fact, it works out great in that context. Also, the fact that this is a budget board is not lost on me. The fact that the most expensive part of this board are probably these Duroc lavenders. Yeah, that says a lot. The board itself can still be purchased on AliExpress. Epo Maker has a version of this exact same case with the exact same hardware from the exact same company on their website as well. The keycap set is by Acco, and you can pretty much get this all the time. So if you enjoyed the sound of this keyboard and enjoyed the cleaning process of getting it all cleaned, leave a comment down below. If your keyboard looks just as bad as this one did, it might be time for a cleaning. You can also check out this shirt and the shirt I was wearing earlier in the video down below as well. And maybe consider subscribing. It'd be nice to have more of you guys on board. And I would appreciate seeing you guys in the next video. Wolfie, out.